Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I hope you're seeing some nice weather wherever you are. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and our spring has been a little crazy. We have had days where it really felt more like summer with actual summer thunderstorms, including some very high winds. Unfortunately, my next door neighbor experienced 2 trees coming down, and one actually came down onto her house. We luckily had no damage during those storms. And then later on, we had frost and freeze warnings, even though it's late April. That's not unheard of for Cleveland, but it is somewhat unusual. We had a hailstorm recently, not in the area I live, but in the area close to me. There was a hailstorm that apparently destroyed the cars of multiple car dealerships, putting dings in their hoods. To me, this is just an example of climate change, and unfortunately, I think we'll see more of that, more extreme weather patterns, which may end up affecting things like the financial markets in the future, but perhaps less likely to directly affect physician compensation, which is the topic of today's podcast. Medscape came out with their physician compensation report for 2026 on April 10th, and I thought I'd go over what their findings were. Medscape does an annual survey where they ask thousands of physicians about their compensation and how they feel about their compensation. In this current report, 5,916 full-time physicians who are practicing in the United States completed the survey from Medscape between September 5th and December 17th, 2025. The good news is that U.S. physicians reported a better year for pay gains compared to the prior year. Even better is that more physicians said that they felt like they were fairly paid. The average physician compensation for 2025 was $356,000. which is a 3% increase from the 2024 average of $374,000. For PCPs, the average for 2025 was $298,000 compared to $287,000 in 2024. Specialists averaged $417,000 in 2025 compared to $404,000 in 2024. With inflation reported at 2.7%, the average pay gain actually outpaced that of inflation. Matthew Wheels, a senior director of AMGA Consulting, says that the key drivers to increased compensation were rising individual physician productivity based on seeing more patients and generating more work RVUs combined with improved technology-driven efficiency. There were also 8 specialties where the average compensation actually exceeded $500,000. The top compensated specialty was orthopedics and orthopedic surgery. Not surprising since that often tops the list. They had an average compensation reported of $611,000. Cardiology came in second with an average compensation of $575,000 and radiology third at $571,000. The other specialties where the average compensation exceeded $500,000 were plastic surgery, anesthesiology, urology, GI, and ENT. The lowest average compensation for any specialty was our friends in pediatrics at $266,000. This year, the Medscape survey also asked physicians about how aggressively they negotiated salary in their contract. While 4% reported being very aggressive, on the opposite end, 27% of physicians reported not at all aggressive. Another 27% of physicians reported negotiation was not even an option. Chad Studelberg, the Nationally Managing Director of Healthcare Compensation and Rewards for Arthur J. Gallagher & Company, which is a risk management consulting firm, is quoted in the Medscape article saying, quote, "Now I routinely tell employers, do not negotiate. Come up with a standard compensation philosophy and agreement, and when the doctor comes back to you and says, I'd like to negotiate, say, no, we don't negotiate." This idea that whoever is the best negotiator gets the best deal is a bad philosophy for an employer that is trying to build a collaborative environment. Trust me, other physicians would know 5 minutes later what the other doctor negotiated, end quote. Honestly, I don't know how to feel about that. On one hand, perhaps if there really were standard compensation, then there wouldn't be the gender pay gap. However, I'm not really sure that that would truly be the case. In the end, I think in the private practice world, most physicians end up getting paid some percentage of collections, but what percentage of collections is something that can still be negotiated. Also, different physicians have different needs and different desires. For example, some physicians want a lot more vacation or get a lot more value out of benefits like healthcare insurance, and some physicians don't get as much value out of that or don't care to take as much paid time off, but maybe desire more flexibility in their schedule. To me, negotiating job terms is more about finding the best fit between the employer and employee such that it works out for both parties. And that's not going to be the same for every employee because every employee doesn't have the same values when it comes to compensation. A great example in my personal case is that I have great healthcare insurance through my husband, but his healthcare insurance actually requires me to be on my own healthcare plan with my own employer if I'm offered healthcare through my employer. So I want to stay on his plan. So if I work a job where my employer offers me healthcare and I have to pay a premium for that healthcare plan, now I'm paying more in premiums because I'm paying the premium to be on my husband's healthcare plan and the premiums to be on the healthcare plan of my employer. So that's actually me paying out more. And potentially I have more healthcare coverage, but in reality, I have more headache dealing with two different insurance companies trying to cover my healthcare needs. And then on the flip side, there is a cost to the employer offering healthcare to their employees. So it's less cost if they cannot offer healthcare to an employee. So it can take some negotiating to work out something that's best for both the employer and employee given an employee-specific situation. Anyway, back to the Medscape survey, since this is not a podcast episode on negotiating compensation. When physicians were asked if they felt fairly paid for their demanding jobs, 53% of all physicians said yes, leaving 47% of physicians feeling like they were not fairly paid. Among PCPs, it was 50% who answered yes to being fairly paid, which meant that another 50% answered no. While overall, that still isn't great, it's better than the report from a year ago, where only 48% of all physicians answered yes, and 45% of PCPs answered yes to feeling like they were fairly paid. Those statistics apply to how each physician felt about their individual compensation. When asked about compensation for the medical profession as a whole, 61% answered physicians are underpaid, 34% selected that they were paid just about right, and 5% thought physicians were actually overpaid. Some answers that were shared include, quote, a lot of subspecialists are paid too much. A lot of doctors in primary care are not paid enough. Another person wrote, quote, physicians are underpaid for the knowledge and training required and the stress and liability they endure. Yet another physician wrote, quote, do I get paid fairly? Yes. Is it fair in compensation to my adult colleagues? Absolutely not. Our medical system is based on ridiculous rules that shouldn't matter, end quote. Respondents were asked to compare their 2025 total compensation with 2024. 4% of physicians reported an increase of greater than 25% in their compensation. 8% reported an increase between 11 and 25%, and 30% of physicians saw an increase of 1 to 10%. 42% of physicians reported that their compensation remained the same. Remaining the same, at least, is better than a decrease in compensation. 10% of physicians reported a decrease of 1 to 10%, 5% recorded a decrease of 11 to 25%, and 2% of physicians reported a decrease of over 25%. Now, what's not included in that data is whether physicians ended up working more or less, but all the physicians answering the survey did report being full-time. Of course, the definition of full-time can vary somewhat. I recently talked to a practice where 3 days a week is considered full-time. So if a physician who was working 4 days a week goes down 3 days a week, it's not unreasonable to expect that their compensation would go down by 25%. Physicians were also asked how much their total pay matched with their family's living expenses, debt, and retirement savings. 28% of physicians reported that their paycheck covered their family's needs, 44% reported it matched what they needed, and 28% stated it was less than they needed. When it comes to what specialties saw the most compensation growth, cardiology was the top for a 10% increase. That was followed by ophthalmology and radiology, which both saw 9% increases. Pediatrics and rheumatology remained flat. Psychiatry and allergy and immunology reported a 3% decrease in compensation. The gender compensation gap was 31% in favor of men over women at a value of over 102,000. In the survey, gender was self-reported. Among PCPs, the gender gap was 14%, and with specialists, it was 34%. The gender gap was found to be much larger with specialists at 34% compared to with PCPs, where the gender gap was 14%. Racial disparities in compensation also showed up. Average compensation for white physicians in 2025 was $391,000 compared to $383,000 for Asian American physicians, $361,000 for Hispanic or Latinx physicians, and $342,000 for Black physicians. When comparing these compensation numbers to 2023, over the 2-year period, white physicians surveyed by Medscape reported a 6.1% higher total compensation over the 2 years on average, compared to 6% for Asian American doctors, 3.5% for Hispanic Latinx doctors, and 2.9% for Black doctors. The average incentive bonuses in 2025 were roughly $51,000 for white doctors, $47,000 for Asian Americans, $43,000 for Hispanic Latinx doctors, and $32,000 for Black physicians. This seems to indicate that there's a real discrepancy in compensation for physicians of different racial groups. Geographic differences in compensation show that the Midwest has the highest average pay of $400,000, followed by the West at $389,000. Average compensation was lowest in the Northeast at $375,000, and the average for the South was $381,000. The average incentive bonus was $49,000, with 65% of doctors qualifying for an incentive bonus. Not surprising, the largest factor that affected incentive bonus calculation was RVUs generated. When asked the question, do you augment your regular pay with outside work? 40% of all physicians answered yes. The average work week for all physicians came out to be 49 hours, which is 1 hour less than the 50 hours reported in Medscape's compensation report published in 2025. When physicians asked if their productivity metrics affected base salary, not just their incentive bonus, 35% of physicians answered yes. And that sums up the Medscape Physician Compensation Report for 2026. You can find the full report findings online on Medscape's website, www.medscape.com. I'll end this podcast by saying that it's great that physician compensation is actually increasing. But we also know that reimbursement by insurance is essentially flat and sometimes even decreasing, which really means that physicians are working harder in order to earn their income. Hopefully, some physicians are getting to work smarter as opposed to harder and using new technological advances like maybe AI scribes to help them be more efficient at work. I know I've been utilizing AI a lot more in the last year. How do you feel about your current compensation and how it compares to the prior year? Was your compensation flat? Do you see a little bit of an increase? Did you feel like you had to work more for that increase? I saw a Facebook post where a physician asked if anyone got a cost of living raise. I think, unfortunately, the answer is generally no. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If there's any subject or topic that you would like to hear about, please let me know by emailing me at growyourwealthymindset@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.